Welcome, comrades, to the art of cinema. Well, sir, I understand that you've been separating the wheat from the tares, and we're not talking about saints and sinners here.
That's right. We're talking about revolutionaries and counter-revolutionaries. You see, one of man's great self-deceptions is to think, who sees me? Nobody else knows what I'm thinking. The fool has said in his heart, there are no consequences. You who make your boast in the revolution, do you yet dishonor your glorious leader by defying his revolutionary principles?
Let us hope not, sir, for the counter-revolutionary will suffer consequences indeed when our glorious leader arrives to purge counter-revolutionaries from the People's Republic of F and all his soldiers with him. Before him will be gathered all the people, and he will separate the people, one from another, as the shepherd separates the sheep from the goats.
And I will place the revolutionaries upon my right hand, but the counter-revolutionaries will I place on my left hand.
But, sir, what will you say to the revolutionaries gathered upon your right hand?
I, your glorious leader, General Secretary F, will say to those gathered upon my right hand, come, ye who have sacrificed yourselves for the revolution, and inherit the utopia I have prepared for you from the foundation of the revolution.
Let it be so, sir. But what will you say to the counter-revolutionaries gathered upon your left hand?
Now to those shall I say, depart, ye cursed, into the Arctic labor camps prepared for the capitalists and counter-revolutionaries. For I devised agricultural plans, and you gave me no food. I constructed factories, and you gave me no industry. I provided subsidy for the arts, yet you refused to inspire revolutionary consciousness among the people. And I gave you a sword, but behold, ever did ye fail to pierce the heart of the imperialist.
Yes, sir. But the capitalists and counter-revolutionaries then will say, send General Secretary F to dip the tip of his finger in water and cool our tongues, for we are in agony in this fire.
But then shall I say, between revolutionary and counter-revolutionary a great chasm has been fixed, that those who would travel from thence to us cannot, nor can any cross over from there to us.
That's a good introduction for today's film, sir. As we shall see, this one is called Extreme Measures. It's a 4AF, or 1996 film set in New York City.
Vanity of vanities.
The film starts with a nicely shot flyby of the New York City skyline that gets ominous when, after passing by many of the skyscrapers, it plunges down along the side of one of them. We get a sense of descent even into the underworld.
Behold, blackest darkness. Behold, we are plunged into outer darkness.
Yes, sir. There shall be weeping and gnashing of teeth, and we shall be unable to see each other's faces. The music is really cool, though. A modernist composition by Danny Elfman, very appropriate for this film. If someone would let me write music like this, I'd like to write some film music.
If you want more opportunities within the administration of the PRF, you probably should work on your current responsibilities first.
Yes, sir. So, in the opening scene, at the base of this building we've panned down, two older guys, completely naked, escape from the back door. They're having trouble walking, and they're trying to escape from someone who's after them. Did they get drugged at a brothel or something? Were they at some kind of raunchy party? They split up to try to lose whoever's trying to catch them, and one ends up running down the middle of a busy New York City street in the middle of traffic at night. That must have been fun for those actors to shoot.
Well, yeah, capitalists love darkness rather than light. Neither cometh to the light, lest their deeds should be known that they are counter-revolutionary.
Next, there's a scene where we meet Hugh Grant. Want to guess what Hugh Grant is up to, sir?
Picking up whores?
Well, obviously he's picking up whores. And we have the whores. Shut up, whores. We have to record the show. But I mean, besides the whores, you know what he's up to?
My guess would be counter-revolutionary activity.
Sure. But also, Hugh Grant is an emergency room doctor at a New York City hospital. The paramedics bring two guys in, one a cop who's been shot, and the other the addict who shot him. It turns out the hospital only has one available room, so Hugh Grant has to decide to save the life of the cop before the life of the addict.
Like I have to choose who's a revolutionary and who's a counter-revolutionary.
Yes, exactly, sir. So right at the start, Hugh Grant has to make the decision about which guy's life to save. He decides who lives and who dies. He has to make the call in seconds, and he decides the cop deserves it more. So this sets up the moral gray area this film attempts to explore. We also learn that Hugh Grant's father was a physician in England whose license got revoked because he agreed to perform an assisted suicide for a friend of his who was dying and in terrible pain. So this further establishes the equivocal ethics that the movie is about.
Well, if Hugh Grant has to make the decision, perhaps it is equivocal. But when I, your glorious leader, choose life from death amongst the people, it's unequivocal. Consider this. Ye who forget thy glorious leader, those who live or die upon the path to revolution honor me, and to them shall I grant utopia.
Yes, sir. And to the counter-revolutionary shall ye say, depart from me, for I never knew thee.
Yes, in that hour, whereupon I say it.
Then, our hero, who was running through New York traffic in the buff, shows up in the emergency room. He's unconscious, then he wakes up and he's delirious, and Hugh Grant can't get him to explain what's happened to him. He mentions something about triphase that Hugh Grant doesn't understand, and then he dies. Hugh Grant gets lab work done on this patient, and the results he gets back mystify him. So the first act of the film is Hugh Grant trying to find out what was wrong with this guy. He knows it was something really out of the ordinary, and as he tries to figure it out, he gets more and more frustrated and suspicious, because he runs into a lot of resistance from his bosses and other doctors and hospital administrators. It's starting to look like there's even a cover-up going on, because the body of the patient whose death he's investigating has disappeared, and it's obvious that there's some kind of corruption behind this.
Yeah, some kind of American capitalist imperialist corruption, I would think.
Yes, sir. The class of the wholly propertyless who are obliged to sell their labor to the bourgeoisie in order to get in exchange the means of subsistence for their support. Hugh Grant is finishing up his residency and is about to start a prestigious fellowship at NYU. Some of the people he runs into while he's trying to figure out what happened to his patient start warning him that he might be putting his fellowship in jeopardy by spending time and money the hospital doesn't have on this side project of his trying to figure out what happened to the patient of his. Then, Hugh Grant runs into Gene Hackman at a social function the hospital is putting on. Gene Hackman is a celebrated senior physician. Hugh Grant interrupts the party to ask Gene Hackman if he can give him any insight into the death of his patient based on the information he got from the lab tests. Gene Hackman tells Hugh Grant that there's no way to know what happened since the body is missing and there's no way to run more tests. But when Gene Hackman leaves, he tells his associate that unfortunately it looks like Hugh Grant isn't going to leave well enough alone. Hugh Grant is going to keep looking into this strange emergency room death. So now we know that Gene Hackman is behind whatever it is that's going on.
Get thee hence, Gene Hackman.
Next, we see two cops starting their day. They're both obviously morally conflicted about what they're about to do. What are they about to do? They plant some cocaine in Hugh Grant's apartment, stage a break-in, call some other cops to the scene, and get Hugh Grant arrested on possession of the cocaine. Within 24 hours, Hugh Grant's medical career is ruined. He's kicked out of his residency and the fellowship he was about to begin in a couple of months.
Ha, like the Last Judgment. He's like a pelican in the wilderness. He's like an owl in a ruined house.
So, after his career as a doctor has been thwarted by Gene Hackman to prevent him from figuring out what was going on with the naked emergency room patient, all that's left for Hugh Grant to do is try to uncover the conspiracy in order to clear his name. So, Hugh Grant eventually finds his way into an underworld of homeless people in New York City and is getting close to figuring it all out. What's happening is that Gene Hackman is running a medical research operation called Triphase. At Triphase, what Gene Hackman and the other doctors are doing is kidnapping homeless people, surgically removing sections of their spinal cords to paralyze them, and then trying to figure out how to regrow the nerves they removed and discover a cure for spinal cord injury.
Sounds legit.
Hugh Grant has figured out what's happening at this point, but still doesn't know that it's Gene Hackman who's behind it. So this is a mad scientist Frankenstein sort of movie, playing God, playing glorious leader, I should say. Gene Hackman is kidnapping homeless people who won't be missed, surgically paralyzing them, and then experimenting on them to try to find the cure.
If Gene Hackman wants to play glorious leader, he better be able to turn his into a country of mushrooms by making mushroom cultivation scientific, intensive, and industrialized.
A country of mushrooms? Like the Allman Brothers Band tattoo?
Yeah, mushrooms and almonds and all that. But also let us establish the respected Supreme Commander General Secretary F's monolithic command system more firmly throughout the Army.
What are you talking about? We were on Gene Hackman and his triphase operation.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Well, you know what this makes me think about? You know what paralysis is like?
What? What is it like? Let me guess. The revolution, capitalism?
Yeah, I was going to go with capitalism and the revolution, yeah. Gene Hackman is like the first revolutionaries, but before they had me to edify and instruct them, they're trying to surgically remove capitalism and cure it, but they don't have General Secretary F, the mastermind of the revolution, who alone, by his genius, would compel the imperialist pigs to rend the mantle of their garments and pluck out the hairs of their beards and to sit down astonied, eating sackcloth and ashes, no doubt forgetting to eat their bread, watering their couch with tears.
Well, whatever you say, sir. The film set up some moral ambiguity at the start, as we've seen, by showing Hugh Grant having to choose to save the life of the cop instead of the life of the addict, and talking about how Hugh Grant's father, also a physician, got his license revoked because he performed an assisted suicide to spare his friend a drawn-out, agonizing death. But what Gene Hackman is doing, kidnapping homeless people and paralyzing them so he can experiment on them for the cure, is obviously wrong. There's no gray area there. So you might think that the film fails in trying to establish a difficult philosophical dilemma, but in fact I think it succeeds, and let me explain. I've had some experience of people who've suffered spinal cord injuries. I know more than a few, and have heard their stories. And as far as I can tell, what this film gets right is that, strange as it might seem, it's not usually the paralyzed people themselves who are the most conflicted and distraught over it all. It's usually their loved ones, their parents, their kids, their friends. People who get paralyzed typically go through a good deal of grief in the first year or two. The only life they know is the old one they can't have anymore. They don't know what to do. But this doesn't typically last very long. For the victims themselves, it's not a philosophical problem like how could God allow such a thing. For the victims, the problem is very practical. What do I do now? Which of my goals in life can I still pursue, and which do I have to let go of? Coping isn't easy for them at first, but it's very simple. You have to let go of what you can't have anymore and be content with the life you do have. If you've ever talked to paralyzed people about their lives, if it's after that first year or two, they'll tell you pretty much in every case that they really don't think about it much. The fact is that people are extremely adaptable, and after they get paralyzed, they typically just get on with their lives and are mostly content, well-adjusted people. That's been my experience anyway. It's usually their loved ones, the ones who saw them go through it, who knew them before, who can't accept it. It's usually their loved ones who have a different kind of long-lasting grief about it. For the family members, it is a philosophical problem, and they get worked up about it the way people get worked up about politics.
Right. And that's why the people need a glorious leader to handle political problems for them. No need to get upset, people. I've got you covered.
So, in the film, for example, those two cops who planted the cocaine in Hugh Grant's apartment, one had a son who was paralyzed, and the other, I think it was his wife. Then there's Sarah Jessica Parker, who plays a colleague of Hugh Grant's whom he may have dated as well. It turns out she's working for Gene Hackman's triphase operation too, and she's doing it because her brother is paraplegic and it's her fault. Her brother was a passenger in her car while she was driving drunk, so the car crash and his injury were her fault, and she's racked with grief over it. And it's these characters in the film, the loved ones of the paralyzed people, who have enough grief and moral conflict over it all that they're willing to support the triphase operation, where Gene Hackman has them kidnap homeless people so he can paralyze them and then experiment on them to find the cure. In my experience, that's actually plausible. So I think the film succeeds in setting up the equivocal ethics, the moral conflict that would lead Gene Hackman and his colleagues to do something like this that most other people would see to be obviously wrong. At the climax of the movie, then, Hugh Grant is about to track down Gene Hackman and uncover his triphase operation, but Gene Hackman has one more trick up his sleeve to try to stop Hugh Grant from busting the whole project. Sarah Jessica Parker and her brother knock Hugh Grant out and capture him. And while he's out, Gene Hackman puts an epidural in his neck to make him think he's broken his neck and is quadriplegic. For 24 hours, they let him think he'll never be able to move again. So we get to see some of Hugh Grant go through the first day of trying to wrap his head around something that catastrophic having happened to him. That is one hell of a thing for someone to have to take. Gene Hackman gives him the better part of a day to think about it, then goes in to talk to him. Hugh Grant asks Gene Hackman to kill him, to put 400 milligrams of potassium chloride in his IV and let him die. This is also typical, at the very start, as I understand it. Anything but that. Anything. Lose an arm or a leg, be blind or deaf, die of cancer in your 40s, be a Yankees fan or a capitalist. Anything but paralyzed. Anything. They almost always adjust to it eventually, but they can't see that at first, not for a while. They can't see how life could possibly still be worth living. Gene Hackman tells Hugh Grant it's a common request, just let me die. Then Gene Hackman asks Hugh Grant what if there was hope. If there were a procedure that might heal him, what would Hugh Grant do to make that possible? Anything, says Hugh Grant. Anything. Gene Hackman tells him, you better think about that. But Hugh Grant isn't paralyzed, and next, Sarah Jessica Parker removes the epidural and frees him. But extreme measures takes the easy way out for the end of the film. Gene Hackman and his underlings have a showdown with Hugh Grant. They try to stop him from getting away, and when they can't, and he's about to escape, at the end, Gene Hackman tries to persuade him about the whole plan of kidnapping and paralyzing homeless people so they can experiment on them for the cure. Obviously, Hugh Grant isn't convinced. Like I said, I think the real moral conflict in the film was with characters like Sarah Jessica Parker, who was at fault for the car crash that paralyzed her brother. They ought to have given her the big conflicted decision to make at the end, I think, not Hugh Grant. Obviously, Hugh Grant wouldn't be motivated to do Gene Hackman's Triphase project. But Gene Hackman ends up getting shot and killed in the gunfight at the end of the film, and then, in the final scene, Gene Hackman's wife tracks Hugh Grant down and offers to give him all the research Gene Hackman had compiled from the Triphase project, and Hugh Grant takes it. It's like blood money, except that it's blood research or something. And Hugh Grant takes it so as to further Gene Hackman's research.
You know, what worries me is that I don't see how Hugh Grant is being very revolutionary here. Even in his time of need, he did not seek help from his glorious leader, but only from physicians. He has been weighed on the scales and found wanting. Wherefore shall I lay my hand upon Hugh Grant, and with mighty acts of judgment shall I levy my divisions upon him and upon the peoples of the revolution. Blessed is the glorious leader that walks not in the counsel of the counter-revolutionary, but his delight is in the PRF, and in the PRF shall he meditate day and night. And he shall be like a tree planted by the rivers of waters that bringeth forth his fruit in his season, but his leaf also shall not wither, and whatsoever he doeth shall prosper. Not so for the counter-revolutionary, though, for they're like the chaff which the wind hurls away from the face of the earth.
This has been The Art of Cinema with our glorious leader, General Secretary F. Let us maintain vigilance against the ever-looming threat of an American invasion. You are required to report any non-participation or dissent amongst your comrades. Don't forget to tune in to The Art of Cinema again next time for further discussion of films from the 1990s in your next mandatory re-education session.